The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ethan Blackwood's penthouse, casting geometric shadows across the Italian marble floors. At 33, Ethan had built an empire that most could only dream of. Tech innovations that had revolutionized industries, investments that had turned millions into billions, and a reputation for being as sharp as he was successful. But on this particular Tuesday morning, none of that mattered. What mattered was a single document, and it was nowhere to be found. "It has to be here," Ethan muttered, rifling through the papers on his mahogany desk for the third time. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the unfamiliar sensation of losing control. The contract was worth $200 million, a merger that had taken 18 months to negotiate. The signing was in 4 hours, and he needed to review the final amendments one last time. Without it, he'd walk into that boardroom unprepared, vulnerable, exposed, everything he'd spent his entire adult life ensuring he would never be. He'd already torn through his home office, checked every briefcase, searched every surface. The house was spotless, as always. That was one thing he could count on. Maria, his housekeeper, kept everything immaculate. She'd been working for him for 6 months now, quiet and efficient, arriving each morning at 7 and leaving by 3. He barely noticed her presence, which was exactly how he preferred it. Interaction meant complications, and complications meant distractions from what truly mattered: work. Ethan loosened his tie, a rare gesture of frustration. The house felt too large suddenly, too empty despite its 8,000 square feet of luxury. Each room was a monument to success. Modern art pieces worth small fortunes, furniture designed by Italian masters, technology that could control everything from the lighting to the temperature with a simple voice command. Yet none of it could produce the one thing he desperately needed. He moved through the open-concept living area, his Ferragamo shoes clicking against the marble. The sound echoed in the vast space, bouncing off walls painted in fashionable shades of gray and white. Everything in his home was deliberately chosen, meticulously planned, perfectly placed. Everything except, apparently, his most important document. "Maria," he called out, his voice sharper than intended. She typically worked in other areas of the house at this hour, probably upstairs or in the East Wing. He rarely sought her out. She had her routines, he had his, and they coexisted in polite, professional distance. No response came. Ethan checked his watch. 9:47 a.m. She should definitely be here. He'd seen her car in the staff parking area when he'd returned from his morning run at 6. Where could she be? He climbed the floating staircase to the second floor, checking rooms as he went. The guest suites were empty, beds perfectly made with hospital corners that could bounce a quarter. The gym showed no signs of recent use. His own bedroom remained as he'd left it that morning. Bed made, everything in its place. It was then he heard it, a sound so unexpected in his usually silent home that it stopped him mid-step. Laughter. Not adult laughter, but the pure, uninhibited giggling of a child. It came from down the hall, from the direction of what he'd always thought of as the spare room, though he'd never quite decided what to do with it. Ethan frowned. Maria had a daughter. He knew that much. She'd mentioned it during her interview, asking if it would be a problem if she occasionally needed to bring the child with her in emergencies. He'd agreed with barely a second thought. It had seemed like the kind of thing a reasonable employer would approve, and it wasn't as if he'd be around to be disturbed. In 6 months, he'd never actually seen the child. Their schedules simply didn't overlap, or perhaps Maria was particularly careful to keep her daughter out of his way. The laughter came again, followed by a woman's gentle voice speaking in Spanish. "Isla, mi amor, por favor, ten cuidado." Ethan moved toward the sound, his earlier panic about the document momentarily superseded by curiosity. The door to the spare room stood slightly ajar, and through the gap, he could see movement. He raised his hand to knock, then paused. Through the opening, he caught a glimpse of something that made his breath catch. A paper plane sailed through the air in a graceful arc. Not just any paper plane. Even from this distance, even seeing only a flash of it, Ethan recognized the distinctive weight and texture of premium legal documentation. His legal documentation. He pushed the door open wider. The room beyond was bathed in natural light from the large windows overlooking the garden. Maria sat on the floor near the corner, sorting through what appeared to be cleaning supplies. And there, in the center of the room, was a tiny girl with dark curls tumbling past her shoulders, wearing a bright yellow dress with sunflowers on it. She held another paper plane aloft, her small face scrunched in concentration. Isla, no. Maria started to rise, but she was too late. The little girl launched the plane with all the force her 3-year-old arms could muster. It soared across the room in a wobbly but somehow majestic flight path, and that's when Ethan saw it clearly. The letterhead. The signature lines. The legal terminology printed in precise 12-point font. His missing contract had become a child's toy. Mr. Blackwood. Maria scrambled to her feet, her face draining of color. I am so sorry. I didn't know. She must have found it somewhere. I told her not to touch anything, but she's 3, and I only looked away for a moment. Ethan stood frozen in the doorway, unable to process what he was seeing. The plane, his contract, his critical, irreplaceable contract, landed near his feet. He bent down slowly, picking it up with a kind of care one might reserve for ancient artifacts. The paper was creased and slightly crumpled, with small fingerprints visible along one edge. Isla, oblivious to the tension radiating from the adults, clapped her hands together with delight. Again, she squealed, her brown eyes sparkling with pure joy. Make fly. She ran toward Ethan with the unself-conscious enthusiasm only small children possess, reaching for the paper plane in his hands. Maria lunged forward to intercept her daughter, already apologizing profusely in a mixture of English and Spanish, her voice thick with panic and the certainty of imminent unemployment. But something stopped Ethan from reacting the way he normally would, with cold fury, with a kind of controlled anger that had made boardroom opponents quake. Instead, he found himself staring at this tiny person who had somehow infiltrated his carefully controlled world, this small being who had taken his $200 million deal and turned it into a moment of play. Isla looked up at him with those enormous brown eyes, still reaching for the plane, her expression so hopeful, so completely trusting, that something in Ethan's chest tightened in a way he couldn't quite name. Please, Mr. Blackwood, I take full responsibility, Maria said, her voice trembling as she scooped Isla into her arms. The little girl protested, still fixated on the paper plane. The daycare called this morning. They had a water pipe burst. Everyone had to leave. I had no one else to watch her, and I thought, just this once, she could stay in this room with her toys while I worked. I never imagined. I'm so sorry. I'll replace whatever that document was. I'll pay for any losses. Please don't. She didn't finish the sentence, but Ethan heard it anyway. Please don't fire me. He looked down at the crumpled paper in his hands, then back at Maria. In 6 months of employment, he'd barely exchanged more than a dozen words with her beyond basic instructions. She came highly recommended, did excellent work, and maintained the professional invisibility he preferred in his staff. Now, seeing her with her daughter clutched protectively against her chest, both of them looking at him with varying degrees of fear and confusion, he realized he knew almost nothing about her life. How old is she? The question came out before he'd consciously decided to ask it. Maria blinked, surprised. 3. 3 years old. Her name is Isla. Isla, Ethan repeated. The little girls had perked up at the sound of her name, and she stopped squirming in her mother's arms. She studied him with the intense scrutiny children apply to new and interesting things, the way they might examine a colorful bug or an unusually shaped cloud. You tall, Isla announced with the blunt honesty of toddlers. Like a tree. A very big tree. Despite everything, The missing contract, the time pressure, the high stakes of his morning. Ethan felt the corner of his mouth twitch. No one in his professional life would dare comment on his height so matter-of-factly, as if it were simply an observable fact requiring no filter or politeness. "I suppose I am," he said, surprised by the gentleness in his own voice. He held up the paper plane. "Did you make this?" Isla nodded enthusiastically, her curls bouncing. "Mama showed me. Make it go wish." She made a swooping gesture with her hand, complete with sound effects. Maria's grip tightened on her daughter. "Isla, that wasn't Mama's paper. That was Mr. Blackwood's important work paper. Very, very important." "Importante," Isla repeated, testing the Spanish word. Then, turning back to Ethan with sudden concern, she asked, "Did I break it? Is it all broke now?" There was such genuine worry in her small voice that Ethan found his anger, what little had formed, dissolving entirely. He knelt down, bringing himself to something closer to Isla's eye level, a gesture that felt foreign but somehow natural in the moment. "Let's see," he said, carefully unfolding the paper plane. The document was wrinkled and bore the evidence of its transformation into a flying toy, but as he smoothed it out, he could see that the text was still legible, all the pages still attached. A few more creases than ideal, certainly not boardroom pristine, but intact. "I think it might be okay. A little adventure, but okay." Adventure. Isla brightened immediately, the resilience of childhood allowing her to bounce back from worry in an instant. "Like Dora. Mama lets me watch Dora. She goes on adventures. Do you know Dora?" "I'm afraid I don't," Ethan admitted. Isla looked scandalized. "You don't know Dora? She has a backpack and a map and she goes on adventures, and there's a grumpy fox named Swiper who tries to take things but we say, 'Swiper, no swiping.' And then he stops. Usually. Sometimes he doesn't stop, and then Dora has to find her things again." The explanation came out in a rush, the kind of comprehensive plot summary only a devoted 3-year-old fan could provide. Ethan found himself listening with an attention he typically reserved for financial reports and market analyses. "That sounds complicated," he said seriously. "It is," Isla agreed with an equally serious nod. "Very complicated. But Dora is smart. She always figures it out." Maria had been watching this exchange with visible confusion, her eyes darting between her daughter and her employer as if trying to understand what was happening. Ethan stood, the contract still in his hands, and met her gaze. "The daycare, when will it reopen?" "They said possibly tomorrow, but definitely by Thursday." "Mr. Blackwood, I promise this won't happen again. I can arrange for emergency childcare, or I can take the days off without pay until—" "That won't be necessary." Ethan surprised himself with the words. "For today, she can stay. Just perhaps keep her away from documents." Maria's eyes widened. "You mean you're not firing me?" "Why would I fire you?" Ethan asked. "Your daughter found a paper that I apparently left somewhere she could reach it. That's my error, not yours." Even as he said it, he was trying to remember where he'd left the contract. Had it fallen from his briefcase? Been set down somewhere and forgotten in his distraction? But the paper, it's clearly important. "It is," Ethan confirmed, glancing down at it again. "It's critical, actually. But it's also salvageable. And—" He paused, searching for words to explain something he didn't quite understand himself. "And I'm beginning to think perhaps I needed a reminder that papers are just papers, even important ones." He wasn't sure he believed that, not entirely. Papers weren't just papers in his world. They were deals and opportunities, and the architecture of success. But something about Isla's guileless joy and her simple game had shifted his perspective, just slightly. Isla had been listening to this adult conversation with the intermittent attention span of a toddler, but now she piped up again. "Can you make it fly one more time? Please? I'll be very careful. I promise." "Isla, no," Maria said firmly. "Mr. Blackwood needs that paper for work. The little girl's face fell, her lower lip jutting out in the precursor to tears. Ethan watched the change come over her, this swift shift from joy to disappointment, and felt something unexpected stir in his chest. When had he last felt anything so purely, so completely? His entire life was measured responses, calculated reactions, emotions checked and controlled, because that's what success required. He glanced at his watch. 10:15 a.m. The meeting was at 2 o'clock. He needed to review the document, change into his suit, prepare his notes. Every minute was accounted for, every moment scheduled. And yet, one more flight, he heard himself say. But then I need it back for my meeting. Isla's face transformed instantly, joy replacing sorrow with the magical speed of childhood. Maria looked at him as if he'd grown a second head. Ethan carefully refolded the contract into a plain, not the crumpled version Isla had created, but a more precise fold, using techniques he remembered from his own childhood, from rare afternoons when his father had set aside work long enough to show him how geometry and physics could combine in the simple act of making paper fly. He held it up, and Isla bounced on her toes with anticipation. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," she squealed. Ethan launched the plane. It sailed across the room in a smooth arc, catching the morning light, and Isla chased after it with peals of laughter, her yellow dress fluttering behind her like wings. When she caught it, she held it aloft like a trophy, her smile so wide it seemed to illuminate the entire room. And Ethan Blackwood, billionaire, workaholic, man who had built an empire on careful calculation and emotional distance, felt something crack in the armor he'd spent years constructing around his heart. Section 3. Unexpected Moments. The paper plane made 3 more flights before Ethan finally, reluctantly, reclaimed his contract. Each time Isla caught it, she'd bring it back to him with ceremony, placing it carefully in his hands and then waiting with barely contained excitement for the next launch. The third time, she surprised him by adding her own commentary. "This one's flying to the moon," she announced as he prepared to throw. "It's going to visit the moon mice." "Moon mice?" Ethan asked, pausing mid-throw. "Yes. They live on the moon and they eat moon cheese, and they're very nice. Mama told me about them." Ethan glanced at Maria, who had settled onto the floor with her cleaning supplies mostly forgotten. She offered a small, embarrassed smile. "We've been reading a lot of bedtime stories about space lately. She's very interested in the moon." "I'm going to go to the moon when I grow up," Isla informed him with absolute certainty. "I'm going to be an astronaut and visit the moon mice and bring them some regular cheese because maybe they get tired of moon cheese all the time." "That seems very considerate of you," Ethan said, and he meant it. There was something refreshing about her confidence, her complete lack of doubt that she could achieve anything she set her mind to. He threw the plane one final time, watching Isla's joyful pursuit, and then gently explained that he really did need to keep it now for his very important meeting. To his relief, she accepted this with only minimal protest, though she did make him promise that if he ever had another paper that wasn't too important, he would come back and make planes with her. "I promise," he said, surprising himself again. Making promises to 3-year-olds hadn't been on his agenda for the day, or any day. He should have left then. Should have taken his recovered contract and retreated to his office to prepare. The meeting loomed just hours away, and he still needed to review every clause, every amendment, every possible point of negotiation. But instead, he found himself lingering in the doorway, watching as Maria tried to redirect Isla toward the bag of toys she'd brought. "Mama, I'm hungry," Isla announced, abandoning the toys after only a cursory glance. Maria checked her watch and sighed. "It's not quite lunchtime yet, mi amor. Can you wait a little longer?" "But my tummy is hungry now." Isla placed both hands on her stomach dramatically. "It's saying feed me, feed me." "Your tummy is very demanding," Maria said with a tired smile. She looked apologetically at Ethan. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Blackwood. I'll take her to the kitchen for a quick snack and then keep her occupied and quiet. You won't even know we're here." The kitchen, Ethan repeated, and suddenly he remembered. Have you eaten? Either of you? Maria hesitated. I had coffee this morning. That's not a meal, Ethan said, more sharply than intended. He softened his tone. I mean, if you're going to be working all day and watching her, you should have actual food. I brought some things for Isla, Maria assured him quickly. Some crackers and fruit. I'll be fine. But Ethan was already thinking, his mind shifting into problem-solving mode. My housekeeper should eat lunch, he said, as if working through a logical equation. And I haven't eaten either. And I have a kitchen full of food. He paused. Stay here. I'll be back. He left before Maria could protest, taking the stairs down to his state-of-the-art kitchen. The refrigerator was well-stocked. He had a meal service that delivered fresh ingredients twice a week, though he rarely had time to use them. He pulled out supplies: bread, turkey, cheese, lettuce, tomatoes, fruit. His movements were efficient, automatic, muscle memory from college years when he'd lived alone and actually cooked for himself, before success had meant hiring people to handle such tasks. 10 minutes later, he returned to the spare room with a tray laden with sandwiches, sliced fruit, and glasses of lemonade. Maria stared at him as if he'd brought in a feast instead of simple sandwiches. Mr. Blackwood, you didn't have to. You work for me, he interrupted. That means ensuring you're taken care of during the workday, including meals. It was a practical argument, one that made business sense, though even as he said it, he knew it wasn't the whole truth. Something about seeing Isla's enthusiasm, Maria's quiet dedication, had sparked something in him, a desire to extend basic kindness, basic care. Isla's eyes lit up at the sight of food. Is that for us? Really? Really, Ethan confirmed, setting the tray down on the floor since the room had no table. He hesitated, then lowered himself to sit cross-legged on the carpet, another gesture that felt foreign. When was the last time he'd sat on the floor? Years, probably. Maybe over a decade. They ate together in surprising companionship. Isla kept up a running commentary on everything. The sandwiches, very, very good. The fruit, I like strawberries best because they're red like rubies, and a detailed update on her stuffed animals at home. Mr. Whiskers is a cat, but he doesn't meow. He just purrs, and sometimes he gets in trouble for not cleaning his room. Maria ate quietly, shooting Ethan uncertain glances, as if still trying to reconcile this version of her employer with the distant, professional figure she'd known for 6 months. He couldn't blame her for the confusion. He was surprising himself with every passing minute. Your home is very big, Isla observed between bites of sandwich. Do you live here all by yourself? Isla, Maria said gently. That's a personal question. It's all right, Ethan said. Yes, I live here alone. Isla's forehead wrinkled in thought. Don't you get lonely? When Mama goes to work, I stay with Abuela, and sometimes I miss Mom a lot. Don't you miss people? The question, so innocent and direct, hit Ethan with unexpected force. Did he get lonely? He'd trained himself not to think about it, not to acknowledge the silence that greeted him every evening when he returned from the office, the empty spaces that filled his carefully designed home. Sometimes, he admitted quietly, but I stay very busy with work. Work is important, Isla agreed seriously, echoing words she'd probably heard from her mother countless times. But people are important too. Mama says that all the time. She says people are the most important thing in the whole world. Ethan looked at Maria, who had gone very still, her sandwich forgotten in her hands. That sounds like good advice, he said. Mama gives very good advice, Isla declared loyally. She's the smartest person I know. She knows everything. Well, almost everything. She doesn't know about dinosaurs as much as I do, but that's okay, because I teach her. You teach your mother about dinosaurs? Ethan asked, charmed despite himself. Oh yes. Did you know that the T-Rex was very big, but it had tiny arms? Very, very tiny. Like this. She held up her arms with her hands close to her shoulders, demonstrating. And did you know that velociraptors were actually small, not big like in movies? I learned that from my dinosaur book. For the next several minutes, Ethan received a comprehensive education on prehistoric creatures, delivered with the passionate expertise only a 3-year-old could muster. Maria listened with the patient attention of a mother who had heard these facts many times before but still found joy in her daughter's enthusiasm. Watching them together, Ethan felt something shift inside him. Maria couldn't be much older than 28, he guessed, raising a daughter alone. He'd noted she wore no wedding ring, had listed herself as single on her employment application. She worked hard, took care of her child, somehow managed to maintain warmth and patience despite what must be a demanding, exhausting life. And Isla, this small person who had burst into his carefully controlled morning with paper planes and laughter, seemed genuinely happy, genuinely loved. When had he last felt that kind of uncomplicated love? His parents had been successful, driven people who'd raised him with similar expectations. Affection was shown through achievement, approval earned through accomplishments. His few relationships had followed similar patterns, women who understood the demands of his career because they had their own ambitious pursuits, relationships that eventually faded under the weight of conflicting schedules and emotional unavailability. Mr. Blackwood? Maria's voice interrupted his thoughts. Are you all right? He realized he'd been staring at them, lost in contemplation.
Yes. Sorry.
I was just thinking. He checked his watch. 11:30. The morning had somehow slipped away in sandwiches and dinosaur facts and a small girl's laughter. You should go, Maria said gently. I'm sure you have important things to prepare for your meeting. We've taken up too much of your time already. She was right, of course. He had work to do, a career to maintain, an empire that required constant attention. The responsible thing, the practical thing, would be to retreat to his office and spend the next 2 hours reviewing every detail of the contract now safely in his possession. But as Isla looked up at him with those trusting brown eyes, as Maria began gathering their empty plates with quiet efficiency, Ethan found he wasn't quite ready to return to his normal world just yet. The meeting isn't until 2, he heard himself say. And I work better under pressure anyway. Would it be all right if I stayed a little longer? Unless I'm in your way. In the way? Maria looked genuinely shocked. Mr. Blackwood, this is your house. You can be anywhere you want. But this is your workspace right now, he pointed out. I don't want to interrupt. Isla solved the dilemma by tugging on his sleeve. Can you stay and play with us? Please? Mama brought my blocks, and we could build a castle.
Or a spaceship.
Or a castle spaceship that flies to the moon. Ethan Blackwood, who had board meetings and conference calls and multi-million-dollar decisions waiting, who had trained himself to prioritize profit over pleasure and efficiency over emotion, looked at this little girl and felt the last of his resistance crumble. A castle spaceship sounds perfect, he said. The blocks were simple wooden cubes in primary colors, worn smooth by small hands and countless play sessions. Isla dumped them out of their bag with ceremonial flair, creating a colorful pile in the center of the floor. She immediately began issuing instructions with the confidence of a seasoned architect. The castle has to be tall, she explained, stacking red blocks with careful concentration. Very, very tall so it can reach the clouds. And then we put rockets on the bottom, she held up blue blocks, so it can fly. Ethan settled more comfortably on the floor, his expensive suit jacket discarded, his usually perfectly pressed shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows. When was the last time he'd played with blocks? 28 years ago, maybe more? Yet as he reached for the yellow pieces and began constructing a supporting wall for Isla's tower, the motions felt familiar, muscle memory from childhood emerging from wherever such memories hide. Maria had resumed her work, dusting shelves and organizing the closet, but Ethan noticed she kept glancing their way, her expression a mixture of wonder and lingering uncertainty. He couldn't entirely blame her. He'd gone from distant employer to paper plane enthusiast to castle-building playmate in the span of a few hours. It must be disorienting. You have to make it strong, Isla advised seriously, inspecting his wall. Because when it flies through space, there might be space wind. Very strong space wind. Space wind, Ethan repeated, nodding gravely. That's an important consideration. Should we add support beams? What support beams? Extra pieces that make the structure stronger. Here, he demonstrated, adding diagonal blocks to brace the wall. Like this. It distributes the weight and prevents collapse. Isla watched with fascination. You're good at building. Do you build things for work? In a way, Ethan said. I don't build with blocks, but I help companies build themselves bigger and stronger. Like adding support beams to make them better. That's important work, Isla said, echoing the gravity adults had probably used when discussing such topics. Then, with the swift subject changes of childhood. Do you have a family? Like a wife and kids? Isla. Maria's voice came from across the room, sharp with mortification. That's too personal. It's okay, Ethan said again, though the question stirred something uncomfortable in his chest. No, I don't have a wife or children. I have my work, and that keeps me very busy. But don't you want a family? Isla pressed with the guileless persistence of 3-year-olds everywhere. Families are nice. I love Mama and Abuela and Tio Marco and everyone. They make me happy. I'm sure they do, Ethan said softly. He carefully placed another block, buying time before adding. I suppose I always thought I'd have a family someday. But someday keeps becoming tomorrow, and tomorrow becomes next month, and… He trailed off, surprised by his own honesty. That's sad, Isla pronounced with the straightforward empathy of childhood. Then, brightening. But you could have a family now. You're not too old. Mama says you're never too old to have love in your life. She says that to Abuela all the time when Abuela says she's too old for dating. Ethan glanced at Maria, who looked like she wanted the floor to open and swallow her. Your daughter is very wise, he said, meaning it. She's very chatty, Maria corrected, embarrassed. Isla, let Mr. Blackwood build in peace. No more personal questions. But Isla had already moved on, now focused on creating what she called the rocket part that goes whoosh. Her concentration was absolute, tongue poking out slightly as she balanced blocks in increasingly precarious arrangements. They worked together in companionable silence for a while, the only sounds Isla's occasional commentary, this one goes here, no, wait here, and the soft click of wood on wood. Ethan found it surprisingly meditative, this simple act of creation with no stakes, no profit margin, no quarterly projections to consider. Just blocks and imagination and a little girl's vision of a castle that could fly. There, Isla finally announced. It's done. Look, Mama, look. Maria came over to admire their creation. It was charmingly lopsided, a tower of red and yellow blocks with blue rockets protruding at odd angles, and what Isla insisted were windows for looking at space cut into the structure. By any objective measure, it was a simple child's toy construction. But looking at it, Ethan felt an absurd sense of pride. It's beautiful, mi amor, Maria said warmly. You and Mr. Blackwood did wonderful work. We make a good team, Isla declared, then turned to Ethan. Right? We're a good team? The best, Ethan agreed, and the smile that stretched across Isla's face made something in his chest tighten with unexpected emotion. Now it's time for the most important part, Isla said with dramatic flair. She made rocket sounds, whoosh whoosh, while walking her fingers through the air around their creation. It's flying to the moon. Oh no, there's an asteroid. We have to go around. Whoosh. We made it. Now we're landing on the moon, and the moon mice are saying, welcome, welcome, and they're going to show us their moon cheese factories, and… She continued the story, her imagination creating elaborate scenarios and dialogue for their castle spaceship's adventures. Ethan listened, fascinated by the complexity of her narrative, the way she wove together various influences, the space stories her mother told her, the adventures from her television shows, her own unique creative additions. Maria had returned to her work, but kept close enough to intervene if needed. Ethan noticed the practiced way she moved around Isla, anticipating needs before they arose, gently steadying the block tower when it wobbled, offering a drink of lemonade before Isla asked, redirecting attention when frustration started to build. It was a dance they'd clearly performed countless times, mother and daughter in perfect synchronization. "You're a wonderful mother," Ethan said quietly, surprising himself yet again with the personal observation. Maria paused in her dusting, turning to look at him with wide eyes. "I thank you, Mr. Blackwood. That means a lot." "How do you do it?" he asked. "Work and raise her alone and still have so much patience, so much joy." Maria set down her cleaning cloth and came to sit on the floor near them, close enough to talk quietly while Isla continued her space adventures. "It's not always easy," she admitted. "There are days when I'm exhausted, when I wonder if I'm doing anything right, when the car breaks down and I don't know how I'll pay for repairs, or when she's sick and I have to miss work, or when I see other children with fathers and wonder if I'm failing her by not having that." "You're not failing her," Ethan said with absolute certainty. "Anyone can see how happy she is, how loved." Maria's eyes glistened slightly. "You learn to find joy in small moments. A laugh, a hug, a block tower. Those are the things that matter, not the size of your bank account or how impressive your house is." She paused, then added hastily, "Not that there's anything wrong with success or nice houses. I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant," Ethan said. "And you're right." He looked around his spare room, at the expensive fixtures and designer paint and high-end everything, then at the simple scene before him, a cheerful little girl playing with worn blocks, creating entire worlds from her imagination. "I've spent so long building one kind of success that I forgot to build the other kind." "It's not too late," Maria said gently. "Like Isla said, you're not too old." Before Ethan could respond, Isla suddenly gasped with dramatic flair. "Oh no! The moon mice are in trouble. There's a moon dragon," she made roaring sounds, "and it's very scary, and we have to save them." "A moon dragon?" Ethan asked, playing along. "That does sound serious. Very serious. Come on, we have to make the castle spaceship fly very fast." She started making intense whooshing sounds, her whole body leaning into the action, as if she could physically propel their imaginary vessel through space. Ethan found himself making rocket sounds too, caught up in her enthusiasm. Together they flew, their creation through an elaborate rescue mission, with Isla directing every plot point and Ethan following her lead. At one point, he had to use his big, strong voice to scare away the dragon, which he did with surprising gusto, earning delighted giggles from Isla and a warm smile from Maria. By the time they'd successfully rescued the moon mice and returned them safely to their cheese factories, Ethan was laughing, actually laughing, not the polite chuckle he offered at business dinners or the calculated smile for photographs. Real, genuine laughter that came from somewhere deep in his chest, rusty from disuse, but undeniably real. He checked his watch. 12:45 p.m. The meeting was in just over an hour. He needed to shower, change into his suit, review the contract one final time, prepare his materials. The responsible part of his brain was already cataloging everything he needed to do, calculating exactly how much time each task would take. But another part of him, a part that had been dormant for far too long, wanted to stay exactly where he was, sitting on the floor of his spare room, playing with blocks and listening to a 3-year-old's fantastical stories about moon mice and space dragons. "I should go," he said reluctantly, beginning to stand. "Wait." Isla jumped up. "Before you go for your important meeting, can I give you something?" "Of course." She ran to her bag of toys and rummaged through it, her small brow furrowed in concentration. After a moment, she emerged clutching a sticker, a gold star, slightly crumpled from its time in the bag. "This is for you," she said solemnly, holding it out. For being a good builder and a good friend, and for making the dragon go away with your big voice. Ethan took the sticker with the same seriousness one might accept a prestigious award.
Thank you, Isla.
This is really special. You should put it somewhere you can see it, she advised. So you remember today. Mama does that with my special pictures. She puts them on our refrigerator, so she sees them every day and remembers. That's excellent advice. Ethan carefully pressed the gold star onto the corner of his contract folder, the folder containing the documents that had caused such panic that morning, the $200 million deal that had seemed like the most important thing in the world just a few hours ago. Now, with a crooked gold star adorning its cover, it somehow felt different. Still important, certainly, but not the only important thing. Not even close. The meeting went better than Ethan could have hoped. The contract, despite its adventure as a paper airplane, was accepted without comment, the minor creases dismissed as incidental wear from transportation.
The deal closed.
$200 million changed hands with the stroke of a pen. It should have been the highlight of Ethan's day, the validation of 18 months of work, the kind of success he lived for. Instead, as he drove home 3 hours later, he found his thoughts returning not to the boardroom triumph, but to a spare room and a little girl with curly hair who believed in moon mice and treated him with the casual acceptance usually reserved for people who actually mattered in one's life. The house felt different when he entered. Not physically different. Maria maintained her impeccable standards, everything in its place, surfaces gleaming, but there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere, as if Isla's laughter had somehow permeated the walls and remained, invisible but present. He loosened his tie and headed upstairs, drawn by curiosity to the spare room. The door stood open, and inside, the block castle had been carefully left intact. Beside it, he found a drawing, clearly Isla's work, all bold crayon strokes and enthusiastic color choices. 3 stick figures, one very tall labeled Mr. Backwood, he smiled at the phonetic spelling, one medium-sized labeled Mama, and one small labeled Me. They all held hands and stood beneath a yellow sun with a smiling face. At the bottom, in Maria's neat handwriting, "Thank you for today. Isla and Maria." Ethan picked up the drawing carefully, as if it were something precious, which he realized it was. When was the last time someone had made something for him? Given him a gift not because of what he could do for them or what connection he represented, but simply because they wanted to? He carried the drawing downstairs and did exactly what Isla had suggested, placed it on his refrigerator, held by a magnet. The splash of color looked absurdly cheerful against the sleek stainless steel, completely at odds with his minimalist aesthetic. It was perfect. That evening, instead of working late as usual, Ethan found himself researching daycares in the area. Not because he needed one, obviously, but because he wanted to understand what options Maria had, what resources existed. He discovered that quality childcare was breathtakingly expensive, often more than many people earned. How did Maria manage? Her salary was good, he made sure of that, but even so, he sent her a text, the first personal communication they'd had outside of work instructions. "Is Isla's daycare satisfactory? If there are better options, I'd be happy to include childcare assistance in your benefits package." The response came after several minutes. "Mr. Blackwood, that's incredibly generous, but not necessary. The daycare is good." "But is it great?" he typed back. "She deserves great." Another pause. "You're very kind. Can we discuss this another time? Isla is asking for you. She wants to know if you liked her picture." Something warm bloomed in Ethan's chest. "Tell her I loved it. It's on my refrigerator right now. She says that's where the best pictures go. She's very pleased." Ethan stared at his phone, at this small exchange, and felt that crack in his armor widen further. He thought about his day, the panic over the lost contract, the unexpected joy of Isla's laughter, the simple pleasure of building something with no profit motive, no strategic objective, just creation for the sake of creation and connection. He thought about Maria, working hard to provide for her daughter, while still finding moments of joy, still teaching her child about love and kindness and moon mice. He thought about his own life, his carefully constructed success that had somehow left him eating dinner alone in a house meant for a family, surrounded by expensive things, but divorced from meaningful connection. The realization came to him like dawn breaking, gradual, then sudden, then undeniable. He was lonely. He had been lonely for years, perhaps decades, but had convinced himself that achievement could substitute for affection, that professional success could fill the spaces where personal connection should be. A 3-year-old with a paper plane had shown him, in the space of a single morning, how wrong he'd been. Over the following weeks, Ethan found himself creating reasons to be home during Maria's work hours. He had a home office, after all, why not use it? He could take morning meetings virtually, review documents from his desk rather than his downtown office. His staff raised eyebrows at his new schedule, but adapted quickly. Ethan Blackwood was known for his unexpected strategies. This was just another one. The truth, which he admitted only to himself, was that he wanted to see them. Maria and Isla had become the bright spots in his days. Sometimes he'd hear Isla's voice drifting through the house. She was with Maria regularly now, since Ethan had insisted Maria bring her whenever needed. The sound of her laughter, her endless questions, her earnest conversations with her mother, all became a soundtrack to his work, oddly comforting rather than distracting. He started joining them for lunch, those casual meals on the floor or at the kitchen counter becoming a ritual. Isla would update him on her latest interests. Dinosaurs gave way to ocean animals, which gave way to a phase about butterflies. Each obsession was discussed with equal enthusiasm, and Ethan found himself actually researching topics so he could contribute meaningfully to conversations about monarch migration patterns or the difference between dolphins and porpoises. Maria gradually relaxed around him, the professional distance softening into something warmer. She'd share stories about her childhood in Mexico, about her late father who'd loved to build things, about bringing Isla to America and the challenges and joys of raising a child far from extended family. Ethan listened, really listened, and shared pieces of his own story. The pressure of high expectations, the loneliness of success, the slow realization that he'd optimized his life for all the wrong things. "You're different now," Maria observed one afternoon when Isla had fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted from playing. "From when I first started working here." "Different how?" "Softer," she said simply. "More human." She smiled to soften any offense. "I don't mean you weren't human before. But you were so distant, so focused on work. Now you laugh. You play. You seem happier." "I am happier," Ethan admitted. "Your daughter has taught me more about what matters than all my business degrees combined." Maria's expression turned thoughtful. She has that effect on people. Even when things are hard, she finds joy. I try to learn from her every day. "You're an amazing mother," Ethan said, not for the first time. "And an amazing person." Maria's cheeks flushed slightly. "I'm just doing my best." "Your best is extraordinary." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Isla sleep, curled up like a kitten with her favorite stuffed animal clutched to her chest. The afternoon light painted everything golden, and Ethan thought he'd never seen anything more perfect than this small scene, this woman and child who had stumbled into his life by accident and changed everything. "Maria," he said quietly, the words forming before he'd fully thought them through. "I'd like to help. Not just with childcare benefits, but with other things. Isla should have the best education, the best opportunities, the best life. Let me help make that happen." Maria turned to him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Mr. Blackwood." "Ethan," he interrupted gently.
"Please."
"I think we're past Mr. Blackwood." "Ethan," she said, testing the name. "That's very generous, but I can't accept charity." "It's not charity," he said firmly. It's investment. In someone I care about. He paused, recognizing the truth of his words. In two people I care about. Maria studied his face for a long moment. Whatever she saw there made her smile, tentative but genuine. Okay, she said softly. Okay. But only if you let me cook for you sometimes. Real meals, not just sandwiches. You work too hard and eat too little, and that's not healthy. Ethan laughed.
Deal.
It wasn't romance, not yet. That would come later, growing slowly and naturally over shared meals and playtime with Isla and long conversations about dreams and fears and futures. But it was connection, real and genuine, the kind Ethan had thought he'd traded away for success. 3 months after the paper plane incident, on a Saturday afternoon, Ethan found himself back in that spare room. But it wasn't spare anymore. He'd had it converted into a playroom for Isla, filled with toys and books and art supplies. Today, she was teaching him how to draw butterflies. You make a circle for the body, then you add lots and lots of wings. While Maria sat nearby, working on a laptop Ethan had given her so she could take online classes, she'd confessed a dream of becoming a teacher, a dream deferred by circumstance, but not forgotten. There, Isla announced, holding up her latest creation. This butterfly is named Mr. Ethan Butterfly, and he flies very high, but he always comes home for dinner because dinner is important, and also because home is where the people who love you are. Ethan looked at this little girl who had changed his life with a paper plane and laughter, at her mother who had taught him that wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts, at the room full of color and life and joy, and felt his heart, that organ he'd neglected for so long, swell with an emotion he barely recognized because he'd experienced it so rarely.
Love.
Not romantic love. Not yet, but something equally powerful. Belonging.
Family.
Home. You're absolutely right, Mr. Ethan Butterfly, he said, pulling Isla into a gentle hug that she returned with enthusiastic force. He met Maria's eyes over her daughter's curly head, saw the warmth and understanding there, and smiled. Home is exactly where the people who love you are. Outside, the afternoon sun painted the world in gold and amber. Inside, a billionaire who'd thought he had everything discovered he'd had nothing at all until a toddler and her mother showed him what truly mattered. And in that playroom, surrounded by crayon drawings and butterfly facts and the sound of laughter, Ethan Blackwood finally understood what it meant to be rich. Not in money or success or empire building, but in moments, in connection, in the simple, profound joy of being seen and accepted and loved, not for what he could do or provide, but for who he was becoming, who they were helping him become. A paper plane had changed his trajectory. A little girl's laughter had cracked his armor. A mother's patience had shown him a different path. And Ethan, who had spent his life optimizing for profit, finally learned to optimize for the only thing that had ever really mattered: love. The gold star sticker still adorned his most important folder, now kept in his home office. Sometimes, in the middle of a difficult negotiation or a stressful deal, he'd touch it and remember. Remember that success meant nothing if you had no one to share it with, that the best investments were in people, not portfolios, that sometimes the universe sent you exactly what you needed in the most unexpected packages. Like a 3-year-old girl with a paper plane and a smile that could light up the world.